screen. Okay, so my name is Marcella Davis. I am the Enterprise Engagement Practice Director for Dynamic Consultants Group. I've been in the Microsoft space for about 17 years with NAV, 4 years before that with Solomon. I've worked in a variety of industries and a variety of countries in about 22 time zones. I did just complete the Functional Consultant Associate certification. That was tough. I decided to do it on a whim, and I was able to pass it the first time. I am a consultant, a developer, an architect, and a project manager. I have my Bachelor's of Science in Accounting and a Master's in Information System. You can see my contact information on the bottom. I will post that later in the session. Let's see, a little bit about the company that I work for. I'm with Dynamic Consultants Group. We're in the United States. I am in Dallas, and we are a Microsoft Gold partner. We have implementations in CRM and ERP all over the world. And we have partnerships with other partners in both North America and in EMEA. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about Excel layouts for Business Central reports. And I don't know if you're familiar with these or if you've been working in them for a while, but I'm just going to go ahead and start with the basics. So for Business Central reports, they come in two pieces. The first part is the report data set, which comes from the actual report object that's in the system. And then you have the format that is developed using a layout that can either be Word, RDLC, or Excel. And Excel was just introduced in the 2022 release wave 1, which would be BC20. It is a no-code or very low-code reporting option. And it was specifically, well, maybe not specifically, but really targeted at end users, especially accountants who really like to get all of their information into Excel. So Excel layouts for these reports, I'm going to talk about who can use them, why and when you would use them, where they could be used, how to actually do the setup and run them, and then we'll just have a little bit of a summary and a Q&A at the very end. So who can use them? End users, consultants, and developers. These are really targeted at end users who are more familiar with Excel, and it shows the data behind the report as well as how it's being formatted. A lot of end users aren't comfortable using the Word layout. It's a little restrictive. And then I would say consultants, about half and half, like the Word layout. And then some consultants find the RDLC to be a little bit challenging. So if I had to say who this was targeted for, I would say this is more for the end user. And why would you use an Excel layout versus one of the other ones? Well, it's more flexible than a Word layout. Word layouts have a little bit of restriction. For example, when you're trying to put in repeating rows, you can't hide things in Word. It's just going to take everything that's coming from that data set. So you don't have the ability to do that. It's more difficult to put in graphics, especially pie charts or anything like that in a Word document. And then there's also no interactivity in a Word document when we go to share it out. Excel is easier to use than the RDLC layouts, especially for the end users. The RDLC, I'll have my notes here. Pretty tough to use for an end user. It doesn't show the end data, and accountants like to see that data sometimes. The RDLC you have to print to a PDF, usually, although you can send it to Excel. The RDLC does have lots of functionality, but it's more targeted for developers. Word is a little bit easier to use. You don't really get to see the data behind what you're printing. For Word, you're going to do it to PDF or print. You could You could put it in Word and then get it into Excel, but that's a lot of jumps. And there's minimal functionality in Word. It's really more for single documents or like a mail merge than it is for more list type data that's going on. For Excel, you can collaborate on your reports using a lot of the Excel functions. We'll go over some of those in a little bit. You can use a lot of the Excel features and functionality for post-processing. We'll talk about those a little bit later. And you can mix and match data. So you can take the data that's in the Excel report that comes out, and you can mix it with SharePoint lists, on-premise databases, other files, APIs, or you can even use Power Query inside of the report as well. So when would I use an Excel layout over something like Word or an RDLC? I would use it if I wanted to add charts and graphs to a report just automatically. If I wanted to automatically organize the data into a pivot table, a specific pivot table, if I wanted to make it interactive with sliders, more like a dashboard, so if I wasn't going to use Power BI, if I wanted users to be able to do their own thing with the data, I would put it in Excel. If a paper report's not required, if I don't have to send it out to a client via PDF or an email or print it out, have something signed or put in a binder somewhere, I might use an Excel. And if the data set is right, I have run across just a couple of reports that didn't fit for Excel layouts, but those are very few and far between. So let's talk about how Excel layouts are set up. We're going to talk about how to get a blank template, how to create a custom layout, how to import your layout back into Business Central, how to test the custom layout to make sure that you've got it right, and then actually how to use the custom layout. That's where we're going to get into the after processing and the collaboration tools that the users can use. Let's go start with creating a blank template. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go into the search and you're going to find the report that you're wanting to work with. And then you're going to open the request page and we're going to click the send to button right down here on the bottom. If I can get my pointer right here on the bottom, the send to. After that, it's going to pull up your little choose file type, and we're going to select Microsoft Excel document data only, right here, the data only, because we don't want the layout, and we're going to click OK. It is going to download an XLSX file for us, Excel, and this file is going to have 2 tabs when we open it. It's going to have a data tab that's going to give us all the captions along the top and all of the values that are behind the report that we have picked. Now, what they're calling the contract, if you see this in some of Microsoft's documentation or other people's documentation, are the labels for the columns and the names of the tabs. We don't want to change these for the data and the report metadata tab or the columns that are in here. Because if we do, then it will error out when we try and run it. And on the metadata tab, we have all the filters that were used to export the report and all of the report properties. You can see the object name and the actual object number that this report is being produced off of, the extension version that the report was part of, which was part of the base application from Business Central. So we want to keep this one too. And again, I cannot stress this enough. Make sure you do not change the name or structure of the existing sheets. So we don't want to go back and, for example, add lines in here, and we don't want to go back and add columns or change the names of the columns that are in the data tab. So again, don't change them. Okay, so the data that you're getting was filtered based on your request page. Here's a little thing that comes from Microsoft. And when you're doing the Excel with the data only, you notice there's no layout. It's just a raw dump of the data that's coming out of the system, which is perfect for a lot of accountants because they want to kind of do their own thing with it. So now we're going to talk about creating a custom layout and some of the possibilities that you have. So in my example, I pulled down the chart of accounts report, and I just added a pivot table where I grabbed the account number and I grabbed the balance. In my filter, I added a slicer that now I'm able to affect what's in the pivot table and in my chart here by selecting my account type. So anything that's coming out of that record in that data set, you can use in these slicers, and you can use multiple slicers. And when you're exporting the report, it will automatically produce this pivot table, it will have the slicer, and it will have the chart on it. So instead of having to export the data and recreate the report every single time, it will just automatically come out with this functionality. You can rename fields in the pivot table. So in my data, it comes out with this lovely name, GL account underscore account something. And I've renamed it over here. And I've also renamed my balance at date. And the other one isn't showing up here. But we can rename these in the pivot table. Again, do not rename them in the data worksheet. Let it go ahead and pull into the pivot table, and you can go ahead and change the names that are displayed here. The next thing we're going to talk about is if we're not doing pictures, graphs, pivot tables, things like that, but instead we want to actually pull data in, say for headers, or we want to do something with the lines. I'll show you a couple of examples. We're going to use the structured references like you're used to in Excel. So for example, sums. But in this case, we're going to use table and column names. And I'm going to show you an example of both and when you would use one or the other. So in this case, I went ahead and created a tab. And for my chart of accounts, I used an explicit cell reference for my data. So on my data tab, I actually came in here and said, I want to concatenate what's in field G2. And then I put in a dash, and then I pulled in what was in Q2. So I specifically did this concatenation with the explicit cell references, and then I just dragged it down when I was ready to fill out my report. Now this works. However, if I add data to it, it's not going to automatically fill in the additional rows. So I'm kind of stuck, and it may cause problems later. So something like this with the explicit cell reference is great for headers. I'm not sure that I would use it for repeating rows, which brings us to how to repeat rows. So you can use the same kinds of formulas to repeat rows using the table and column names. So this time, instead of using an explicit reference and just dragging it down, what I did is I used the filter functionality. So in this case, I said, I want to filter the data in this particular column that's in my data tab, and I want to filter it based on my data in my account type field being not equal to heading. And then I put my formula in A4, And then what it did was it looked in the rows underneath A4, and it wanted to make sure that everything under A4 was blank. And then it inserted all of the data for me, all the way down. When I did it the first time, I had data in A6 and 7, and it gave me a spill error, SPILL, and it made me take out what was in A6 and A7 before it came down. With this same filter function, you can put in multiple criteria by using the multiplication or star operator, which would signify and. So in this case, I'm saying filter this particular region, and I want this particular region equal to H1 and this particular region equal to H2. So you can use compounded criteria for your filter. You can also use sort in combination with this filter. So I can say, okay, I want to filter this with my compound criteria, and I want to do it in descending order. So at the very end, the -1 will be descending order. And I can also do an or. So in here, I was doing an and with the multiplication symbol. To use the or, I'm going to use the plus symbol here. So it's going to be, I'm going to filter this information where this criteria is equal to H1 or this criteria is equal to H2. And again, I'm going to pull it into my descending order. Now, what does that get us? I took this from Young Soo's. He's a Microsoft MVP. I love his blog. I highly recommend it. I took this example from him. It was an order confirmation. So he has explicit references. I'll show you those in just a second for the header information and specific information. And then here he's done the repeating lines using the filter, just like I did on my report. And then here you can see how he structured it. Here are the explicit references that he has for his header information. Again, with the lines, he has the explicit reference for the headers, and then he's using the filter information to do the repeating lines that come down at the bottom. I know you're going to ask for totals. So if I have my repeating rows, how do I get totals at the bottom? If it's pretty static, you can do something like a count or a sum at the bottom. If this is not going to work for the functionality that you're putting in your report, if it's going to be variables, you might try grouping or doing subtotals. That seems to be working in my reports. You may have the same success that I have using the grouping or subtotaling options. Once you put in your filters to do your repeating lines, you can then sum them down at the bottom. A couple other things you can do when you're creating your custom layout, you can actually add conditional formatting in there. So if you want, in my example, with all of my asset accounts, I wanted to highlight them in orange, and then in my liability counts, I wanted to highlight them in green. You can use the conditional formatting when you bring the information into your custom format tab. You can also use the data insights. So in Analyze Data, you can use it on your table, on your data table, and it can actually tell you that it's analyzed, and it can make some suggestions if you want to. So in this case, it wanted to insert a pivot table about balances, and then here it wanted to put in a graphic about totals. So if you're not sure, if you're not exactly sure what you want to see in your data, you can use the Analyze tool and it will make some suggestions for you. You can also use the sorting and filtering functions on your data and in your report. You can use the data tools, actually data tools section in your menu bar, to manipulate data, take out duplicates, and do further analysis. And you can see right here that my data model is in my data tools. We can use the forecasting. If your data is in the correct format in your report, you can do what if analysis, and you can use the forecasting sheets to do trend analysis. You can do outlines, like I said, grouping and subtotaling. I use this a lot. And you can also use the Power Pivot tools to put in measures and KPIs into your reports. So all of these functions that are in Excel, you can use on that data to create reports in your Excel layout. What you cannot use is the VBA tools and the password protection. It causes problems when you pull it back into Business Central, and it does not format the report very nicely. So I would stay away from using that. You can always use them after you pull the report out of Business Central, but you cannot make it part of your layout when you import it back into Business Central. So once I have my custom layout all done and I'm happy with it, I can then import it back into the system. So I'm going to open my report layout page, report layout. I'm going to select the row that is associated with the report that I've just been working on. In this case, it was the chart of account. I can either click the three little dots and click new layout here, or I can just click new layout up in the menu bar. And then I'm going to get the dialog box and I'm going to put in my layout name, a little bit of a description, and then I want to make sure that it says Excel. And then I'm going to determine if it's going to be available for all companies. So when I just put it in, it'll make it available for all companies. If not, it'll just be for the company that I'm in. Once I click OK, it's then going to ask me to choose my Excel layout. It'll bring up a file explorer. You'll pick it and you'll click OK. And then the next step, it will write it into my report layout. So you're going to verify that your new layout has been added to the list. So that's a pretty easy one. It follows kind of the import process that's available, like for configuration packages and other places in the system with just the file explorer. Once it's in, you can select your line and you can set it as the default layout for that report. So when you go to select it to print, that'll be just the default print. So instead of RDLC or Word, you can export the layout again. So if you need to adjust it after the fact, you'll be able to export it and adjust it, and then you can re-import it. And when you re-import it, you can either make a new layout or you can replace the old layout, and it will actually prompt you to make sure that you're wanting to replace your layout. Once you're done importing, you're going to want to test your custom layout just to make sure that you haven't put in a function that Business Central doesn't support. And to do this, you're going to pick your line and you can just say run the report. And it will pull up the dialog box, but now you're going to see, since this is an Excel layout, it's going to have a download button instead of a print. Once you click the download, it will download it into an XLSX file, and it should have your custom tabs, your data tab, and your metadata tab. And this was my first attempt at exporting it, and it just put everything in like I wanted to. Now we can talk about some of the things that the users can do with an Excel layout that you probably can't do with a Word or an RDLC layout. You can collaborate using comments. So once the Excel is out, this is just a regular Excel function. So I can pick a cell and I can put a comment on it and I can send it to someone else, which I can't do in Word or my RDLC. I can use the note function, and this note will, I believe the last time I tried this, my note stayed with it when I imported it in and then brought it back out. I can use the ink function to draw, and then I can save it and send it to someone else. So I can say, hey, look at this. Once the Excel comes out of the system, I can use the protection. So I can password protect it. I can lock a sheet down. I can lock a workbook down. I can also lock editable ranges. That's once it comes out of the system. I cannot lock it if it's in the layout, but I can lock it after it comes out. Additionally, I can use the sensitivity function in Excel to classify the document. So if you have classification requirements, you can set this up. Mine was not set up for my company. It has to be enabled by your administrator, but then you can classify the document. So if it's not for everybody, you can set that classification on the worksheet after it comes out. We can also use the collaboration tools like sharing, and once it's shared out to like OneDrive, you can copy the links and send it to someone so they can actually look at it, and you can either attach it into emails as a workbook or you can print it to PDF. Something that I thought was pretty neat recently was you can actually use these Excel workbooks that come out to kick off workflows. We won't go into that in this class, but you can put the add-in into your Excel, and then once it comes up in the worksheet, you can actually use the flow button to kick off a workflow that you have created in the system. That's a pretty quick overview. I know this was an hour-long session, but this was a pretty easy thing to go into. So I'm just going to recap, and then we can ask questions. I do have my Excel if we want to take a look at that in just a minute.
Thank you so much, Marcella.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Marcella. Yes, so just for everyone's awareness, on the ground, this feature, we can't underestimate how much it's going to be used on a day-to-day basis. Would you agree, Marcella?
I agree, because accountants really love their Excel, and I have had a lot of people waiting for this function for several years. They were taking it out of just the RDLC, throwing it into Excel. They didn't like the formatting. They fought with it. Recent improvements in the RDLC, that was great, but everybody always wanted to get their hands on the data and just have it export with their chart. And so this gives them that hold on that data. And I've seen so many people use it just since it's come out recently.
Thank you, Marcella. So let's take a look then at any questions. Oh, there's lots of questions, Marcella, in the chat here. So, okay, so the first question is, can you filter sales purchase lines that is displayed directly on the word layout for non-technical personnel?
On the word layout, no, I have not been successful in filtering when you're doing the repeating rows on a word layout. It just comes straight from the data object. So you have to go back into the data object to do the filtering, because I haven't been able to make it work in the word layout. But you can in the Excel layout, which I think is pretty neat.
So Alonso was asking, how can we change in a pivot table the name of the column depending on a datasheet column?
Okay, let's see if I can get this over here. Can you see my Excel?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so let me get to my GL account by type. And we were talking about changing the name in the pivot table, correct? So when you
Yes,
have
correct.
when you have your pivot table fields, you can come over, do the value field setting, and you can change the name here. And then it will change it over in your pivot table. So this one was GL, this lovely GL balance at date, and I've changed it to balance at date, or I could just say balance date. And now it's changed it to balance date.
You made it look so easy, Marcella. So he has a second question, which is, and how can we transfer the data from the data sheet into a new sheet without a fixed range?
Not a fixed range. Okay. I think you're talking about this, which was like a direct reference. So let's just do this. Okay, so here is my data sheet. If I'm not looking, so I can either do it, let's just do a new one. Okay, so here I can either do equal to here, if it's just a fixed cell there, or like I said, I was using all the way up, I can just use my filter. So I will go ahead and copy this over to my new sheet so you can see what it's doing, sheet number 1. So here I just have the 1 and I could drag that down, or, sorry, I can do my filter, and you see by putting in this filter and using the ranges, it's going to pull everything that's in the data sheet that's in that column. Again, I can filter this, I can sort it so that I can just get a subset, but you see if I do a direct reference use it versus using my filter reference, what I get. Now I can just come over here and drag this down and get the same numbers, but I think it's a little bit easier to use this one.
Now that you've answered that question, Alonso's actually he likes to throw another spanner in the works. He'd like to know if it's possible to achieve it without using a pivot table.
Okay.
Oh, Marcella's doing something.
Without to get this kind of information without using a pivot table?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so it would be the same thing. Basically, we would be using this filter. So doing this one, and then let me see what my data is. Because I know pivot tables, I have a love-hate relationship with pivot tables. GL balance that date, okay? So in this case, I would do kind of the same thing. Oops. So instead of this, what was that one? That was balance that date. Account. Oops. And then it brings up everything. Balance that date. And so now I have my data and it's not in a pivot table. So it was just 2 filters. So filter for the one column and then a filter for the second column. And I've got the same data that I had in my pivot table.
So Alonso, all 3 wishes have been granted. So over to Amy now. So Amy's asking, can we do dynamic repeating columns and fixed number of rows?
Dynamic repeating columns, fixed number of rows. Let's see. So that would almost be something similar to a pivot table. or what we were just doing here. So you could do a fixed number. So you could do a fixed number here, like with my GL. And if I had more data columns, I could do, like for dates, I could just add more columns here with the groupings. Let me see if I can actually come up with an example for that. I know I do have one. It would be a different report, not the chart of accounts one. But what I think you're wanting is something like, let's see, this would be like September 2022, October 2022, and then just continuing on down the line. I think that's what you're looking for. I have an example, but I don't have it on my computer right now, but I'll make it available in the download materials.
Thank you so much. So William is asking, I want to use nice headings in the pivot tables. How do I do that?
We were just talking about that, about changing them from these lovely account names to the nicer names. You'll just click here. So you'll click over into the pivot table, you'll go to field settings, and then you'll just change the name in the custom name. So if I want to do GM account. There you go. And then everywhere that it's referenced, it'll just turn it into GL account.
Fantastic. Wow. So you've made all that look so easy. So there any other question? There is another question. There's a question saying, sorry, question is not related to Excel, but it's related to report question. Is
Okay.
can we change saved value property in report extension? It might not be for this session, Marcella, but that's the question. Might not be directly related.
Yeah, I would have to look into that a little bit more. Probably doesn't apply to Excel, but if I do find the answer, I will make it available in the materials that are for this session.
Excellent. So there is a question saying, in the code level of the report, okay, hard coded? Yes. I'm not sure if that's a question or not. In the code level of the report, hard coded question mark? Yes.
Okay, so going back to the very, very beginning, when I was talking about reports come in two pieces. The first piece is the actual report object that's in the system, and it defines what data is going to come out on your data sheet. So in that report object, it's going to say, I'm getting this caption information, I'm getting the GL account, I'm getting, let's see, I'm getting the account type, the totaling, the balance at date, the Giphy code caption. That report object is actually telling the system what data I'm going to export. I am not able to, within the Excel layout here, to add columns to say, I want an extra column to come out of the system. So all of that is hard coded into that report. If you wanted an extra column to come out, you would have to go back to a developer to have them add it, and then it would show up in your Excel layout.
Fantastic. Now, William is asking, can data and report metadata tab be hidden when imported back into BC as layout?
You don't want to hide them. You don't want to hide them. However, I can hide them and protect them when they come out. Now, I say that I've never tried to hide them, but I am told that the only two things you cannot do with an Excel layout is the VBA and the protection. So if you're hiding tabs, I'm assuming you should be able to. I haven't tried that.
Fantastic. So there is another question. So Alonso, he's had his 3 wishes granted. He's asking for a 4th.
Okay.
I think we should allow him. I think since it's you know he's been throughout the whole day. So yeah. So last question he's asking. Lastly, Marcella, in the pivot table column name, can you insert a formula?
Insert a formula in the name here.
In the column name.
I don't think so. In the column names for pivot tables, I've never tried it before. However, you can when you are in one of the other pages. So here, let's do sheet 1. So here, if I wanted to do something, I can add anything I want to for the header. So I could say equal. Let's see, I don't have my data tab. Equal concatenate, let's see, what was it? Data, sorry. Data, so I could say, what was this? G2, I don't have my formula back up. I could say this, let's see. Plus, no, that's going to do, it would have to be text. So it would have to be text. This is just going to add those two numbers together. But you could do a formula. It is allowing me to do the formulas in the headers. You can't do it in a pivot table, but you could do it in the other custom reports.
Excellent. Wow. So everyone's questions have actually been answered now, it looks like, Marcella. So that's really great. I think it's been a huge, I think this is definitely one of those, definitely a high value features. So that adds a lot of value to organizations when it comes to getting data and sharing data sets across the organization. So Alonso is saying he owes you a big beer. Because you've answered all his questions. So Marcella, this has been really good. I mean, I remember, you know, myself when I was working with F&O, for example, you know, these data reporting features, when you're asked by a manager, often you have to pull this data out very quickly. And I think what you've done is you've shown a feature that everyone on this call is going to benefit from. So thank you so much for sharing that. I just wanted to ask, as we wrap up this session, would you like to make any announcements? I know DCG is one of the global community partners for Power Community. So is there anything that you'd like to share or any announcements you'd like to make before we wrap up?
I'm sure that in our download of the session materials, I know that my marketing partner will probably have some upcoming webinars or some of the events that we're going to be attending. I just want to thank everybody for coming out today. If you have questions, go ahead and scan the QR code for the session materials. You'll have my contact information. And I do have a couple of things that I'm going to be adding for questions that were asked that I was not able to answer during the meeting today. So I will get those to you.
Thank you so much, Marcella. So I was wondering if William had any announcements to make. I know that there's lots going on in the community that DCG are contributing towards and learning and training workshops. So huge kudos to DCG. Thanks again for supporting our community efforts and the global Microsoft community around the world. So hopefully next time we hope to see you in person as we move back to in-person events. It'll be great to see everyone in person again. So huge thank you, Marcella, and everyone at DCG.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Excellent. So there you go, guys. So you learned a lot today. Thank you, Marcella, for sharing those nuggets of information.